Hello, I'm Philip Mugglestone, and in this series of videos we're covering the R integration for SAP HANA. In this video we're going to look at some key concepts for the R integration for SAP HANA, and we'll have our first look at the SQL script that we need to write. Now the way this works is that an application or a client may make a request that we'll call a procedure that we've set up. So we will set up procedures for R integration. And that procedure will be what actually makes the call out to R and then returns the results. So what actually happens in that process? Well, when you run the procedure that we will create, two things are sent to the R server. First thing that's sent is some script. It's the actual code that you want to be run on the R server. That's R code. And then the second thing is one or more tables from the HANA side will be converted and sent over to R, where they'll become effectively data frames, which is the grid layout within R. And that will then be something you can work on with your R script that's sent over. And then once processing is finished, your script comes to the end, data frames that are on R then get converted back to what will be HANA tables and transferred across. So that's all done under the covers by the R integration. So we'll create a procedure that actually has the script and defines the tables that will be sent across and will be returned back by the HANA server. And then your application can do any other processing pre and post actually making that call to the R server. So let's have a look at some code. So here we are in HANA Studio, and what we can see is that we've got access to a HANA system, and we actually have a schema in it called R. This will be our example schema. Within that schema we've got a table, we'll call that customers. Let's just have a quick preview. This is the data that we'll be using for our initial test. And what we can see here, we've got actually 6 columns. We've got a numeric ID, we've then got each customer's name, and we've got 4 pieces of numeric information: lifetime spend, recent spend, new spend, their income, and their loyalty index. We've got as information about each customer. And perhaps we want to maybe group these customers. We have about 150 at the moment. Maybe we want to group these customers and put them into clusters or to segments for further processing, or maybe for dealing with them in a certain way. So we might want to do that using R, and what we're going to now see is some of the code behind that. So that's our input data. So if we were to look at a very, very simple example of how we would now start to want to be able to process and deal with that in R, the first thing we would need to do is in fact create a procedure. And what we can see here, we've used the syntax create procedure. It's just like a normal stored procedure. We give it a name. I chose to call it R_KM because it's going to be a k-means with R. And we define input and output tables. And you can define any number of input and output tables. In this case, I've chosen 1. You don't necessarily need to have an input table or even an output table. It's completely up to you. The R integration is very, very flexible. It's really completely up to you how you want to make use of it. Now what we see is key here is in that procedure definition we're saying we're using a language called rlang, and this is a special language. It basically means we're going to put R script, so R code, within this procedure, and that's what will get processed. So between the begin and end we can see we've got 3 lines of code. And this is not HANA code, this is not SQL script, this is R script. If you want to know more about that, you can find lots of tutorials and books about R and what the syntax is, how you work with it. What I'm going to focus on in these videos is on how the integration with R works between HANA. So we can see we've got some code here. I notice that we've passed in this input and output tables in this case, so we may want to process them. Now all tables, whether input or output, basically are converted from HANA tables to data frames within the R environment. So if we want to access data, and here we've chosen to take the ID, the lifetime spend, new spend, income and loyalty from our input customer table. If we want to then access that, we can do it very easily by using what is a data frame, which we chose to call data. The reason it's called data is because we said input parameter, our name, data, and that's the name, that's the model of what the table looks like. And later on, actually, we have a call statement here, which is actually once we've created the procedure, we actually send it in the name of the table or the view. And again, for our results, the name of the table that we want the results to be put into. So we can see we've got our data frame called data in this case, and then if you want to access information from that, for example, you want to pick out the last 4 columns but take all of the rows, then using our syntax you can actually use the correct syntax with C for columns and then pick out by name the 4 columns we want to work with from that frame, that data frame. And very similarly, we can see that where we want to maybe put the results, so if it's going to calculate the cluster number for each of those customers, we want to take the ID value and add on the cluster number to it and have that sent back to HANA as our results set. So actually we're populating the results data frame, and that's in fact called results in the out parameter. That will then get converted into a table and be sent back as a new table or an updated table in HANA. So we have some housekeeping at the beginning and after. We create a view, in this case, to access just the columns we need from customers, and we create the output column table where our results will go with those 2 columns in it. So we need to make sure that these structures exist. I will not create them for us. And then the other thing we really need to do is actually just make that call once we've defined the procedure. Now, some tips on this in terms of optimal performance. What you want to try to avoid when working with R is transferring more data than you need between HANA and the R server. So what we've done here, for example, is we've actually created a view without the customer's name. In that table, the original table, we have the customer name, but we've dropped that here. So we've not transferred the customer name over to R because it's not actually going to be needed. We just send the columns that we actually need. And it's especially important to try to avoid transferring text columns, character columns between R and HANA, because that's something that can be quite resource intensive. So we've just filtered the columns we actually need to use. And also notice that when we access them, we could in R access columns and data frames in many different ways. There's lots of alternative syntax you can use. However, we've chosen here to actually use names. So we actually access columns by their name rather than, for example, the column number. And again, that's for performance reasons. And in terms of the information we send back, well, we could send the live spend, new spend, income, and loyalty. We could send that all back to HANA as well. But why would we need to? We really just want to see what the cluster number is. We've already got the original live spend, new spend data in a HANA. So what we've chosen to do for the results is just have an ID, which we of course will need, and just then the cluster number. So we put the ID together with the cluster number, and that's what gets sent back. So we're minimizing the information that's transferred, the tables and data frames that go between HANA to R and then back from R to HANA. So that's important from a performance perspective. So we can run that code. So let's just run all the code. You can see it executes. If we look at the log, we'll see it created our procedure. We created our tables. Here we can see the procedure was created, everything was fine, and then it actually ran our procedure. So what we can see, if we look, we can see that the procedure ran with overview, so we see the names of the output tables. We then have our input data, just a quick select from our source data. Here we've got no customer name because we made a view instead of actually a physical table where we had just the 5 columns needed. And then we see the results, which is the output table that came back from R, where we have the ID, and for every customer ID we've got the assigned cluster number, which in this case is between 1 and 3. So that's how it works. It's actually very, very simple, very, very flexible. You can do thousands of different things with R, and the R integration basically allows you to access all of that, but it's up to you to define and decide what part of R you want to use, which libraries, for example, within R you want to access. There are lots and lots of those, or you can make your own. And also, it's up to you to consider what data you actually need to send across to R, if any, and what data you want to have brought back from R after processing. So there's no rule on that. It's really up to you to optimize and work out what it is you need to do. And HANA has got some great capabilities in terms of parallelism. So something in terms of really optimizing performance that you might want to consider as well is if you can break up the work you need to be done by R, maybe into segments, maybe process the 1,000 and then another 1,000, another 1,000, you might want to maybe set up a procedure that you can actually have call to R different segments and actually take advantage of processing that stuff in R in parallel, and then you join the results up at the end. So there's all sorts of possibilities to work with R. It's really very, very open and very, very powerful. So that gives you a quick overview on what the key concepts are. And in the next videos, we'll see some more details about how you can go a little bit further than this extremely simple example that I put together, really just to show you what you do where in the code.